Okay, so we got pretty deep on technology there, right? We've had a few sessions, technology, AI. We're talking about transformation. We're talking about progress. We're talking about opportunity. And I think it was mentioned earlier, but there's a blur here, right? And a big blur that really fascinates me is this blur between technology and humanity. And when we talk to people and leaders and executive teams, the technology conversation always comes back to people, right? Every time. Why? Because people use technology. So that's why I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce the next panel. The title for this one is Helping Leaders Design New World People Experiences. I have three amazing panelists. So would you please welcome, firstly, Rajan Kalia. He is creator of the New World People Leader Model, CEO of Salto D. Fay Consulting, and the Faculty of New World People Leader at the Fast Future Executive. I've also got Cortney Harding. Cortney is CEO of Friends with Holograms, great name. Adjunct professor for New Mexico State University, World Economic Forum Metaverse Council, and the faculty on designing AR, VR experiences at the Fast Future Executive. And last but not least, Simon Taylor, head of organizational development at Gap, Inc., and author of Build Smart, a book just released. So guys, I'm going to leave you to it. Welcome.
Thanks, Mark. And hello.
Yeah,
okay. You have, okay, great.
We're in business.
Great, super. So we're going to talk about designing new world people experiences. How's been the experience of these screens out here?
Wonderful.
Nice. So that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about. And I have Cortney, who's been designing amazing experiences for organizations and people who work in those organizations. And when we started talking about it, we said, how do you cut this topic and what do you do? So we looked at that screen and we said that if you were to look at processes, then you were to look at organization, and then you were to look at customer. How do all of these things relate? Because organizations ultimately work for a customer. But organizations build processes, and then in those organizations, you have people and you have other aspects which come through to work on. And then ultimately, the engagement of the customer has to go through. But I'm going to pick this up with Cortney a bit, and I'm going to invite her to talk about how do you design these kind of things, Cortney?
Yeah, so that's a question I am frequently asked, and something I've been doing for a long time. So I think the best place to start, and this is the question that I ask when I run these workshops, right? And I've lived in New York for 19 years, so I sort of ask this like a New Yorker, which is like, what's your problem, right? And that's kind of a silly way to ask it, but basically an organization needs to know what problem they are solving. So they need to go back through, look at their training, look at their workforce development, and say, this is where we're falling short, and this is where this type of training in virtual and augmented reality could plug the gap. If all of your employee training and education is next level, world class, you have zero problems, I mean, you're a unicorn, buy a lotto ticket, but that's usually not the case, right? So it's understanding like what problem are we trying to solve, and then like how do you measure the impact, right? You want to design for impact. You want to understand what changes you are trying to make when you build this. You have to have those two things really, really clear and top of mind before you even get started, right? You have to define that. The next one is you have to center the user's experience. So my colleague Effie is somewhere around here. I don't see her now. There she is. Okay, so Effie brought her Insta360 camera with her. She's been carrying it around and shooting some really great footage. And I was so psyched when I saw it, and we were talking about it. And you have to make sure that the user is present in all of these experiences. And in this case, if you're shooting 360 video, the user is the camera. So you need to be talking with the user, engaging with the user, making sure they are present in the experience, because just passive experiences don't really work. They don't move the needle in the way that active experiences do. The next is minimize the friction, right? And that's hard sometimes because VR headsets are not, they're widely available, right? You can go to any Best Buy in the United States of America and buy an Oculus headset, and they're $200, so they're not that expensive. But there's still the friction of people are uncomfortable with them, people don't really understand how to use them. So it's really understanding and working within your organization to make things as simple as humanly possible. And it's really funny. So there are some folks here, UC Irvine, the business school in particular, is doing amazing stuff with virtual reality. There's a woman here named Carrie Albers who is incredible. She's working with a lot of different amazing professors on this. So, you know, the challenge though is sometimes it doesn't work on the university's Wi-Fi. So you invest in this technology, you build something incredible, and then like your Wi-Fi network security messes it up. So the point is you need to think of all these contingencies and prepare and make it as frictionless as humanly possible for people to use, because if they run into any friction, they're gonna bounce and that's it, you've lost them. And the last is reward the early adopters. You know, this is risky, this technology. The last thing you wanna do is punish people in your organization for trying to take the next step. That's the worst possible thing you can do, is to punish those people, because they're the ones who will just like leave, go to another org, and make real change there. So again, that's very top level. This is explained much more in the book. That's my pitch for the day. But you know, that's hopefully gives you a good starting place for how we're discussing all this. So back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. I'm going to invite Simon to talk to us about his experiences on designing, you know, in real time for various organizations, these people experiences, and what are the changes you're seeing, Simon? You know, specifically because we're talking about from our perspective of future on how do you design some of these things. And Courtney did talk about the AR, VR experiences, and you know, sometimes you feel these are just you know, very far and few organizations who do that. But in your experience and work with various organizations, how do you see this going?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think the thing that's interesting about this is there's a lot of topics we've talked about today that feel like they're far out there, and it's sort of like, okay, how do we grab a hold of that and bring it into the present? I think this topic in particular, if I can say that, AR, VR, has particular potential to be able to like really bring that into the present, to be able to utilize it now in your organization. And what I've seen over the years working at different organizations from Disney to Warner Brothers and Gap now, is that organizations are struggling to know what's the use case and how do I actually apply this in a way that solves a particular problem. And you know, you have certain parts of the organization that sort of are pioneering or trying things. But I think what I've seen over the years really work is you've got to ultimately anchor around what you said, what's the problem you're solving? And if it becomes this sort of opportunistic, we think this is a cool technology, we want to be futuristic, there's opportunity here that sort of broadly speaking, it doesn't really get that far in the organization. And maybe you've all seen that in your own sort of experience, right? If the idea is not tethered to a problem or something that's really tangible in terms of driving the business strategy, then it's going to fall flat. You know, you may have some exciting meetings, but ultimately it's not going to pass the sniff test as we go through. And so, you know, what I think is really important is to really think of first and foremost is, you know, what is the, if you think about learning and development, for instance, because I think learning is a particular use case where AR, VR has some utility, and we see organizations already doing work in this space. I think the big thing to really think about is like, what is the skills imperative that needs to be solved? What's the problem that we're solving from a skill standpoint where AR and VR would actually make sense as a modality to be able to accelerate or make the learning more effective than the alternative in a classroom setting or what have you. And then it's like, how do you start to pilot that? And really think about it, like, you know, get some proof points and begin to work with leaders in the organization that are open to this. So as you're thinking about this topic, and there's a truckload of really great content in the chapter, so I'd highly encourage you to check this out. You know, I feel like we're just scratching the surface here, and I really want to just reinforce the great content. As I read the chapter, I was super impressed. There's a lot there in the AR, VR space, but again, it's like coming back in the context of your organization with what's the need, what's the problem we're solving, and then how do you sort of bring that through in a really pragmatic way. So that's, I guess, maybe not giving you specifics is what you're asking for, but I think what sometimes can be more helpful in a way is sort of the guiding principles and the mindset and the framework of how to think about this. So sort of take, as I started with, sort of that concept from the future into the present and actually begin to adopt it in your organization.
Hey, thanks. And you know, you talked about training and development, but when we were writing the chapter, we looked at various other ways to do it. For example, how do you use these experiences, R&D, or product design, right? And in those processes, how do you do that? Or analytics. Courtney, when you are looking at these things, you know, I had a point of view on R&D and how do you build product, etc. How have you seen some of the organizations particularly use them for these kind of processes, which are beyond training and development, because training and development is the easiest use case we can look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've seen a lot of organizations build what's called digital twins, which is basically they replicate a physical space in virtual reality. So whether they're architecture firms, that's an easy one. A lot of architecture firms are using this to do what's called pre-visualization of spaces, and then make changes in real time, so that they're not kind of waiting to have to do that in a physical space. That's a lot cheaper to change something in virtual reality than it is to change something in a physical space. Product design, so I've seen car manufacturers bring in new models, they've built these digital twins. And the nice thing about VR is there are a lot of different products where you can have these collaborative meetings and collaborative work sessions. So rather than if you have a globally distributed team, you have to bring everyone into one place, they're away from their families, it gets very expensive, carbon emissions from airplanes, all that stuff. So everyone can just be embodied as an avatar in a virtual space, from their homes or from their individual workspaces, and then working on this model, again, in real time. So it actually saves any sort of time lag. And those are the two kind of best examples that I've seen. There's also just like virtual meetings and collaboration. So again, if you have this room full of people, which is amazing, right? A lot of you probably had to travel today, whether you drove 20 miles and sat in your car, I flew from New York, he flew from India, which is incredible, right? Then, there is a cost to bringing people together in a physical space. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, sometimes, but this is also could be replicable in virtual spaces. So those are kind of the top three that I've seen that tend to work really well.
Thanks. And when we were again debating and thinking, one of the things which comes up, Simon, always, and it's a contradictory kind of thing, is that if you use things like that, which you put in, and you have your own bubble, right? Because when you put a AR, VR, and you're interacting largely in a space which is virtual, and your bubble is created, how do you look at collaboration? I have a point of view, but I want to test your point of view, because that is the point of view which all leaders say, hey, people will not collaborate, and they need to come, and we need to be face-to-face, et cetera, et cetera. So what's your point of view? How have you seen things differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a particular point around collaboration where I think a lot of times we talk about collaboration in a way that it's sort of this pie-in-the-sky, idealistic platitude. If we should collaborate, collaboration's good. And I get where that comes from, and I sort of agree with the general sentiment. But collaboration really is only beneficial when it has practical utility, when there are individuals who need to coordinate and collaborate in order to get a job done, to get things done, not just to sort of, get together for the fun of it, right? And so back to your question, is I think when it comes to AR, VR, and collaboration, it's like, and I think you teed it up really well in terms of travel. Where is there actual real utility where that's going to solve a problem by us collaborating and working together to solve a specific problem? Because maybe through AR and VR, it's going to be a more dynamic interaction. It's going to cut down on travel costs, or it's going to be a more rapid sort of iterative way of doing things versus maybe a more asynchronous way on, let's say, Teams or email or what have you. So I think it's really getting crystal clear around what is the opportunity for collaboration, and then the business case becomes clear, right? It's going to be easy to sort of sell folks in the organization on the opportunity, taking it out of this sort of idealistic, opportunistic, AR, VR, futuristic thing to like, no, this is solving a real problem for us, and therefore we need to do it. So that's how I think of it.
I'll just add another point on the collaboration piece, because I can tell some of you might think, well, okay, that's fine. We can have meetings in VR and that's neat, whatever, but we can also just have meetings in real life. So what's the big deal? So here's something you can do that you couldn't otherwise do. So an organization that I've worked with decided they wanted to do a brainstorming session about a new product. So they brought in 10 people ranging from interns to C-suite. Each person was in a headset, their voices were disguised, so they all sounded like they were in witness protection, and they were all embodied as these like kind of silly looking avatars, right? Much like the ones you've been seeing on the screen during breaks. And they were all just numbered 1 through 10 randomly. So the point was you had no idea who was speaking, and no one else knew who else was in the room. So you had a moderator who was posing questions, but then you had all this open discussion. And what they found, which shouldn't be surprising, but was interesting, is the younger folks on the team spoke up a lot more. They often had really good ideas. The C-suite listened to them because no one knew who else was in the room. And so the point was they had this great collaboration session. They actually got a lot of work done. And then, of course, the big reveal was it was, the CEO and also this kid who'd been done with college for 2 weeks. And that was really fascinating. And that's not something you could do in real life. Right? You couldn't bring together that group of 10 people. The CEO is going to look at some 22-year-old kid and be like, oh, whatever. But in this case, the anonymity really worked well. So that's where we can, again, start thinking a little bit outside the box with this technology and really doing some interesting progressive stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. You actually stole my point because I was going to ask you that question from a different perspective. What you've written in the book is that you said that, VR can be empathy machine, yes. Right? So, if you were to look at it, and it's a big statement to make, right? How can VR be an empathy machine? Because you're actually isolated, and you're, as I was saying, in your own bubble, but we call it empathy machine. So would you like to elaborate and say more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, that statement is from a TED Talk that was given 10 years ago, and I do think it's a little bit overblown, but I have seen it work in really interesting ways. So a piece that my organization built was on workplace inclusion. And the idea was to make somebody feel excluded. So this was a VR piece designed to make you feel bad because that's a terrible experience, right? If your colleagues are excluding you and leaving you out, that's not a good feeling. So we built something that made people feel kind of bummed out and negative. And where it had the most impact was on people who hadn't really felt that way before because of their sort of demographics and the way they worked, right? So putting somebody through that experience, I saw a lot of people get very angry and kind of be like, oh my gosh. And then they realize wait, this actually happens to people. This is bad. We have to change how we work in our organization. So I think that's where you can make a big impact. It's not so much the, VR documentary about crises in the world, which can be profound and very important, but it's really about letting people experience these things for themselves that I find has the greatest impact. And that's where I think the empathy in VR is really important.
Sure, thanks. So one of the things we talked about in the book is about how leaders can feel differently. Specifically, if you were to look at transformations, and organizations are always transforming nowadays they say transformation in the flow. And when you were to look at how would people react and what will happen. So if you were to play it out in VR rather than going directly to the people, it helps us get tuned to what's going to come in. But Simon, tell us a little bit more about if you've seen some kind of a use in how do organizations use this for transformation or getting employees ready to come in and join an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's probably, you guys probably have seen this a number of years ago, you guys are really on the cutting edge, is, just workplace training, being able to quickly onboard individuals to be able to operate effectively in their roles and really decreasing that time to productivity, which has really strong financial metrics around it. And so I think that's sort of a key area that I've seen for sure in terms of opportunities. I think like so many things, it's an area of ongoing evolution, and organizations are sort of figuring out their use cases too. And it's sort of a bit of a chicken and egg sometimes on that. But even it's a parallel thing, but there's, we see with, AI, Sora, their video tool around sort of creating generative AI videos. It's this is a whole new platform, a whole new opportunity that's really has the potential to upend how the work gets done, obviously in the entertainment industry in that case, using one example. And I think AR, VR has a similar kind of opportunity where it's not always clear what exactly it's going to look like, but time's going to tell. And there's a real opportunity for organizations to get on the leading edge of that, to really ask those right questions, tied to the problem that they're solving, tied to those strategic priorities. And there's a list up here, I think, behind me, if it's on this slide, I believe, to really think through, how do you make sense of this practically in your organization in terms of the specific thing you want to go after when it comes to AR or VR, or if it even makes sense at all. Because it frankly may not make sense for you right now. Maybe in a few years it will. Or maybe it won't, right? It depends on the context and depends where your organization is. But I think starting really with what is that strategic imperative? What is the thing in your organization you've got to solve the problem around? And there's a number of sort of questions you can ask. I won't go through them one by one. that can help you sort of peel the onion back around like, how could I actually move this forward to be able to try out different use cases in the organization, from considering the different stakeholders you could partner with to how does it align with the organization's values and more. So I think like so much of these things, it's around how do you fit it into your current context and make those strong connections so you can, again, take it from this esoteric potentially idea or concept or a cool idea into something that's really driving business value.
And thanks. So, I got the clock here. We got only 1.5 minutes going. So I was very curious because what's happening is this technology and the decision making, which is going to be about AR, VR, or the reallocation of expenditures, is in the hands of people who are in their 50s, not even their 40s, right? They decide where to put the money, how to allocate, and the CFOs and the CEO, their average age would be in the 50s. And I don't think they would have ever tried AR, VR on themselves. So how do you make leaders turn around, Cortney, to this point of view? Because you haven't experienced it, you don't know what it looks like, but you're talking to so many people. I know you've carried your headset here, and it's safe because you said it is expensive, and you don't want to lose it, right? But talk to us a little bit about that, and how can that change happen?
My knee. Right, that's it. Like, that's the easiest way to sell this stuff. And there's so much data out there about the cost saving and the benefits that this type of training brings, whether it's just like time proficiency, which VR cuts dramatically, whether it's, again, the empathy piece, right? And you can quantify that by saying, we have less turnover because people feel happier working here. We have fewer lawsuits about bias in leadership, right? So there's a lot of data out there, and I won't sit here and rattle off statistics because it's pretty easy to find, but I think that's the thing that wins at the end of the day, right? I mean, this technology is cool, it's flashy, it's interesting, it's amazing, but it also provides real quantifiable results, and I think that's the sales pitch.
Oh, I see Mark here. Okay, shall I hand it over to you?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think thanks. Such an energetic conversation, though. Absolutely love it. I think a key takeaway that I've heard is like, it's here, it's now, it's real, right? Because I think for a lot of people, this does feel a little bit far away, Simon, to your point earlier. And it's been repeated a couple of times, but like picking the problem to solve feels like where people start, right? And I was at a conference a few months ago, and I heard a transformation leader from Philip Morris. And she said something really interesting. She said, like, she's talking about her approach to transformation, and she said, I only pick the biggest problems, right? Which is actually counter to what a lot of us think, where it's like, let's start small. She's like, only go for the hairy stuff. Because, yeah, it's hard, but that's where the value is, right? That's where the buy-in is. That's where the executive kind of support comes from. So I think that was a key point, but brilliant. So look, questions. Here we go.
Do you see AR, VR together with Neuralink evolving in the next 5-10 years into training and development version 20.0?
I'll take this one, guys. No, I'm kidding.
No, because Neuralink doesn't work. I mean, and there's a pile of dead monkeys in Elon's basement to prove it. And look, I mean, I think the way that we...
Okay, strike that.
Elon, please don't sue us. But no, I mean, look, I'm being facetious, obviously, but Neuralink is not proven out technology, right? I mean, it's still very, 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 very experimental. So that time horizon, I think, feels very ambitious. But the way we consume this will change, right? I mean, I have a Vision Pro and I like it, but it's big and it's heavy and it's clunky, and it's going to get lighter, it's going to get cheaper, it's going to get faster. I mean, we're just going to see these devices really evolve and change, and whether that's like a pair of glasses we put on every morning and just go about our day much like we go out with our iPhones, or like however we consume it, I think that's going to evolve. I mean, potentially, sure, it could be like a contact lens type of solution, but that feels very sort of science fiction at this point.
Great. One more. We got time. Oh.
Thank you very much. This was a very informative session, as always. I have a question about AI adoption. We have seen in many industries that AI technologies are in place, but their adoption is very behind. We are behind. Besides rewarding early adopters and some cost-effective solutions, is there any other incentives you have in mind that could really motivate the people to adopt it as quickly as the technology comes in place?
Yeah, so I can just take that, and Courtney, I'd like you to add to it. I think wherever there's safety, wherever there's human life at stake for training other people, whether it is oil rigs, whether it is even doctors, this technology is the answer, right? Where you really don't need to go deep down to fix something. You can actually learn about it and then go, or engines, or wherever there's danger, there's a clear-cut case for it, and it's already happening. But Courtney, you may like to. So there's a soft part of it because she talked about the empathy and the other stuff, but there's a hard part to it. And all the hard part where real engineering, mechanical, electrical stuff is involved, this is a no-brainer.
One thing I'll add briefly is that if the business case is there, then it's all just down to good change management. Which of course is a good executive sponsorship, helping folks move through the change, awareness, buy-in, all that good stuff. So, I know you get all that stuff, but that's just how I'd frame it up is if you got the hard solution, it's really the soft stuff, which is the change management to bring it to life. And you shared a few good examples too. I think, she should get a clap because she's asked the most good questions here. No offense to anyone else, but she's on a roll.
Great. Okay. Rajan, Cortney, Simon, thank you so much. Good job, mate. Thank you.